So let's just start. You guys went through the storm. It sounds like you got through the storm okay, and then what happened?
Well, actually, the storm was just creeping into Laurinburg on that Friday night. I guess it was the
14th of September.
And we'd lost power, and my husband and children went down to our church, which is a couple blocks away, and to use the power down there so the kids could play games and whatnot. And on their way back home, there was a tree branch across the road, and the winds were just starting to blow in. And so rather than go around the tree branch, Jadon wanted to move it out of the way so other people wouldn't have to. So when they got out of the car, that's when we think two other tree branches fell, one hitting my husband and one hitting Jadon. My husband was able to get up, my son was not. My daughter, who was in the car, then called 911, and then I received a call from my husband to bring some towels and to come and help. I didn't know what we were looking at. I couldn't get the garage doors up because the wind was blowing them so hard, so I just basically was running down the street in my bedroom slippers carrying towels and screaming for help.
What did you see when you got there?
Saw the ambulance, and I was so relieved that the ambulance had arrived, and I saw my daughter. Was not allowed to go into the ambulance with my son, which was my first indication that something serious was wrong. We had a neighborhood friend who also goes to our church who had heard the EMT call over that had arrived on the scene, and he carried both my daughter and me to the Scotland County ER room. My husband was in the ambulance with Jadon.
What was that like for you as a mom to realize something big has happened?
You know, well, it was horrific. It was there, but there was a calm there that you wouldn't think typically would be there. I knew that something serious had happened. This was probably my worst nightmare, and when I really had no idea the extent of his injuries until we got to the hospital. And then we had to wait a while before we could get back to see both Billy and Jadon. And when we went back, I saw my husband kind of wrapped in a turban from his wounds, but he was on his phone, so I figured, you're good to go. Where's my boy? And when they wouldn't let us go back, then the doctor there came out, Dr. Beckman, and he was incredible, but really relayed to us the severity of the situation. It was very eerie in the ER that night. There wasn't a lot of activity because I think everyone was hunkered down, and so it was kind of quiet in there, and it was just sort of a solemn environment for us to kind of process things.
Traumatic brain injury. I mean, most of us know what that means. I would imagine that's hard to hear.
You know, I didn't really know what it meant until they said that your son has 2 bleeds on the brain and 2 fractures in his skull, and we need to get him the medical help he needs that he can't receive here. And then we started hearing words like neurosurgeon,
Life flight helicopter.
life, which would not be possible because of the weather. So then I said, well, then how do we get him where he needs to go? And they said we needed a weighted transport, which is apparently a heavier vehicle used in those kind of weather conditions. And I said, okay, where do we get one of those? And then at that point, when they said there's none in the area, we're calling around to see if we can find one. The closest one out is Charlotte. I think at that point my hope began to diminish quite a bit because I knew how much time was going to be involved in getting them there.
My understanding, it was touch and go for a bit.
I think that it was. I feel like Jadon was experiencing some seizures in the vehicle on the way over to the hospital, which is apparently pretty normal for someone who's just fractured their skull. When we understood the gravity of the situation, it became very clear to us that we needed to speak to our son and talk to our son. At that time, we made calls to his brothers who lived away, his grandparents, so they could talk to Jadon, not knowing if our son could hear us or not.
But he wasn't talking back.
No. He was, when he went in, he was breathing on his own. By the time we saw him, he, of course, had the breathing tube. And we really just spent some time in prayer. We had some church people that made the drive over that came back to the emergency room with us and just spent time comforting us and talking to Jadon, and lots of praying going on. Lots of praying.
And I know he was in the coma, they said, for 3 days. How hard is that to see your son just laying there?
You know what? I think we were just glad he was laying there, lying there at that point, because when we left, when we heard that the Charlotte was just a few minutes out from getting to us, the relief that flooded us was just amazing. And I thought, okay, my son's got a chance. And we really just credit the doctor there at Scotland for doing whatever he could, and he was just determined to get our son either to Chapel Hill or he's, wherever he needed to be. And so when I spoke to the EMTs, I couldn't ride with them. They said, you'll have to ride because of liability issues in the weather. And that broke my heart because I wanted to be with him should something happen to him. And I asked them, how will I know if he dies on the way? And they said, well, we'll just meet you at the ER, Miss Olsen. So that 2-hour drive up, the same man that had driven my daughter and me to the hospital got in his truck, which was not a weighted vehicle, and took us
through the hurricane.
We did. We followed the ambulance. We got on 74. 74 was blocked. There were multiple times trees were down across the highway. That ambulance just went right around them into oncoming traffic, and we went
into the eastbound lanes.
And we went right with them. And I said, don't leave that truck. And so the drive there was probably the most harrowing moments because we just really realized what was at stake there. So we were just
probably longer than 3 hours.
Yeah, it was
we were
about
on the
3
road.
hours. So 3 hours for them to get here, 3 hours for us to get to Charlotte. And, that's a long time for someone who's experienced that kind of an injury. So my son called me en route. He said, Mom, we're on the way. We're going to meet you in Charlotte. They live in Blacksburg, Virginia. And when we pulled into the ER here, it was so quiet. It was probably midnight, maybe
It was
1
about
o'clock.
1:30 in the morning.
And the first thing I see is my son and daughter-in-law, and they just kind of collected me at that point because we were just needing to be collected. And we got to the ambulance, and because I didn't know what they were going to say when they opened the door, and they said, Jadon did great on the ride over here. I was just flooded with relief, like we got a chance now. So surgery, went right into surgery and got up to the PICU on the 6th floor in recovery, and we felt from the very beginning that he had overcome so much just to get there that he was going to wake up. We just didn't know when. And so when he did open his eye and began to have some level of communication, albeit small, actually the first indication that I knew that he was with me is I was playing him some country music. We were playing some Scotty McCreery and some Alan
Andy Griffith
Jackson
Show.
and a little bit of that. And my son said, play him the little beginning of the Andy Griffith Show, where he whistled. And as soon as we did that, his eye popped wide open. And he squeezed my hand. And I knew that, if nothing else, music was going to kind of help him realize that he's okay.
What were his first words to you when he came out?
Well, he didn't speak. The 6th floor
6
started
days.
him on some medication that's sort of to awaken those neurons in the brain. And so it wasn't until we got down here to the 4th floor rehab a week later, the 21st, and one of the therapists came in and she held up a sign that said, say hi. And he said, hi. And then later he would say, Mom, tell your mom that you love her. He said, I love you, Mom. And those were kind of, hi was the first thing, and then, we had to get the mom phrase in there, and then I was like, I love you too, baby. And it's just been uphill ever since. He's really making a lot of progress here.
And what are they telling you now about his future?
Jadon, I feel that he's got a really great future, and that was one of the prayers that we prayed, was that Jadon, our goal for him was to live a fruitful life, whatever that looked like. And that's what Jadon wanted to. He has use of both of his legs and his left arm. He would tell you, he's typically a right-handed child, but if you asked him now, what hand do you write with, he says, well, I'm left-handed now. So, I mean, he's very his right arm is slow to get out of the gate here. We're kind of waiting to see when that's going to happen. But when they went back in this past Friday, which would be 2 weeks from when they took the bone, the bone flap out, they put it back in, and Dr. Waite's word to us was, we had prayed that morning, Lord, when they get in there, we just want it to kind of fit all together like a perfect puzzle piece. And when we got to the waiting room, Dr. Waite said to us, it could not have gone better. It all fit together like a missing puzzle piece.
It sounds like he's got his wits about him.
He does. They'll tell you he's the most well-mannered boy in here because he calls everybody yes, ma'am. And when they say, well, you're sure, very well-mannered, he points to me and said, well, it's because of her, which, of course makes me cry. And he's funny. His wit's been a little slow out of the gate, but when it comes, you're not expecting it. And he's done really well in everything that he's doing. So he's very determined to get back to his good life.